The plane landed in Stockholm on a pale gray afternoon, the last traces of snow still clinging to the rooftops. Lena pulled her suitcase across the terminal, wondering why, after 12 years, Elin had suddenly asked her to come now. "It's just a visit," Elin had said on the phone. Her voice was soft, but something in it felt restrained. Elin's house sat in a quiet suburb. White wooden walls, wide windows, everything so orderly it almost felt staged. Johan opened the door. He smiled politely, yet his gaze lingered on Lena a moment too long. "We have a few simple rules in this house," he said calmly, as if discussing the weather. Elin stood behind him, silent. At dinner, everything moved with unsettling precision. The children spoke just enough. Johan guided the conversation, and Elin barely spoke at all. And when Lena accidentally spilled a little water, Johan gently placed a cloth over it, but the look in his eyes made the room feel colder. That night, when the house had gone quiet, Lena heard footsteps stop outside her door. Very soft. Then a piece of paper slid underneath. "Don't believe what he says." If you've ever felt that something wasn't quite right in a perfect family, stay with this story. Because the next morning, Lena would open a door she was never meant to open. Morning in Stockholm arrived quietly, wrapped in a pale blue light that filtered through the large kitchen windows. Lena woke to the soft clinking of porcelain and the faint smell of coffee. For a moment, everything felt calm, almost convincing. Elin stood by the counter, already dressed, moving with careful precision. "You slept well?" she asked without turning. Lena nodded, watching her. There was something unfamiliar in Elin's posture. Too straight, too controlled. Not the woman who used to laugh too loudly in small cafes back in Göteborg. Johan entered shortly after, dressed for work, his presence shifting the room without a word. He greeted Lena politely, then placed a folder on the table. "I've scheduled the day," he said, glancing briefly at Elin. "School drop-off at 8, groceries at 10, no changes." It sounded less like a plan and more like a system. Their two children, Lucas and Maya, followed the rhythm effortlessly. Shoes lined up, backpacks ready. No hesitation, no noise. Even their smiles seemed practiced, gentle, but measured. Lena tried to soften the atmosphere. "Do you still paint, Elin? You used to..." Elin's hand paused mid-motion, just for a second, and then she continued slicing bread. "Not anymore. There isn't time." Johan looked up. "We focus on what matters now." The words landed lightly, but something beneath them felt heavier. Later, as Johan left, he stopped by the doorway. "Make sure the front door stays locked," he said. "There's been activity in the area." Lena waited until his car disappeared before turning to Elin. "What's really going on?" Elin hesitated. Her eyes flicked toward the hallway camera Lena hadn't noticed before. And then, almost inaudibly, she whispered, "We shouldn't talk here." At that exact moment, Lena's phone vibrated. An unknown message. "I saw you arrive. Don't ask Elin anything. Yet." The message stayed on Lena's screen longer than it should have. "I saw you arrive. Don't ask Elin anything. Yet." She looked up. Elin was already rinsing the cups, on her movement steady, almost rehearsed. The quiet in the kitchen no longer felt peaceful. It felt monitored. "Who would send something like that?" Lena asked, keeping her voice light. Elin didn't answer. Instead, she dried her hands slowly, then reached over and turned the radio on. A soft Swedish news program filled the space, just loud enough to blur their words. "We go out at 10, Elin said, as if nothing had happened. Outside, the air was crisp. Their neighborhood looked exactly how one would expect. Orderly gardens, bicycles leaning neatly against wooden fences, a sense of calm that seemed almost too perfect to question. Yet Lena noticed how Aylin kept glancing back at the house, as if leaving it, even briefly, came with a cost. At the supermarket, something shifted. Aylin reached for a small item, a simple bar of chocolate. She hesitated, and then placed it back. "It's not on the list," she murmured. "It's just chocolate," Lena said gently. Aylin's expression tightened. "Johan reviews the receipts." The sentence lingered between them. On the way home, Lena slowed her steps. "This isn't normal, Aylin." For a moment, Aylin's composure cracked. Not dramatically, just a flicker in her eyes. "You don't understand how things work here anymore." "Then help me understand." Silence. When they returned, the front door was already open. Johan stood inside. He wasn't supposed to be back. His gaze moved from Aylin to Lena, then to the grocery bag. "You bought something extra," he said calmly. No anger, no raised voice, which somehow made it worse. Then he reached into the bag, pulled out the receipt, and tore it in half. The sound was soft. But in that moment, everything inside the house seemed to break with it. Johan didn't raise his voice that afternoon. He didn't need to. The torn receipt lay on the kitchen counter like something insignificant. Yet from that day on, Lena began to notice how small things carried weight in this house, how silence replaced arguments, how control wore the shape of routine. Days passed and patterns revealed themselves. Aylin didn't choose what to cook. She followed a list. She didn't decide when to rest. She checked the time. Even laughter, when it appeared, felt measured, as if it had to fit within invisible boundaries. Lena stayed longer than she had planned. At first, she told herself it was concern. Then she understood. It was because leaving felt like abandoning something unfinished. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, Lena found Aylin sitting by the window, staring out at the dark garden. "Has it always been like this?" Lena asked quietly. Aylin didn't answer immediately. Her fingers traced the edge of a mug back and forth. "It wasn't," she finally said. "In the beginning, it felt safe, structured. I thought, that was love." Her voice didn't break. That was what made it harder to hear. "What changed?" Aylin gave a faint smile. "Nothing changed all at once. That's the problem." The next morning, Johan mentioned a difficult period at work. Financial pressure, audits, investors asking questions. He spoke calmly, but Lena noticed how his control at home tightened whenever his tone shifted, as if the house absorbed what he couldn't manage outside. Later that day, Lena passed by Johan's office. The door was slightly open. Inside, a laptop screen glowed. Lines of numbers, transfers, repeated amounts moving between unfamiliar accounts. She shouldn't have looked, but she did. And just as she leaned closer, a voice spoke behind her. "You're seeing more than you should." It wasn't Johan. It was Lucas. And the way he said it made Lena realize one thing. This hadn't started recently. And it definitely wasn't over. Lena turned slowly. Lucas stood in the hallway barefoot, his face pale but steady in a way no child should have to be. For a second, neither of them spoke. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. Not as a warning, more like a fact he had accepted long ago. Lena stepped away from the door. "Lucas, what is your father doing?" He glanced toward the stairs, then back at her. "Not here." That night, the house settled into its usual silence. Johan worked late in his office. Aylin moved through the evening routine with careful precision. Nothing looked broken, which made what came next feel even sharper. Just past midnight, Lena felt a light knock on her door. Lucas slipped inside, holding something in his hand. A small USB drive. "I don't know who else to give this to," he whispered. "Mama won't leave. She says it will pass." Lena's chest tightened. "What is it?" "Everything," he said. what he does, and what happens when people find out. She plugged it into her laptop. At first, it looked like numbers, transactions, reports, files with neutral names. Then the pattern emerged. Money routed through shell accounts. Medical equipment invoices inflated beyond recognition. Payments redirected. Then another folder. Videos. Lena hesitated, but opened one. The image was dim, taken from a fixed angle. The kitchen. Elin standing near the counter. Johan just out of frame at first. His voice came before his face. Calm. Controlled. Then a movement. Too fast. Too sharp. Elin flinched. Lena stopped the video. Her hands were trembling. From the hallway, she heard a floorboard creak. Not Lucas. He was already inside the room. The door behind Lena was still open, and someone was standing there, watching. Johan didn't step forward. He didn't need to. I was wondering, he said softly, when you would start looking. Johan didn't raise his voice that night. He closed the door behind him and simply stood there, as if everything had already been decided. Lena felt the weight of the moment, not as fear, but as clarity. Something in her had shifted. You should leave tomorrow, Johan said. But for the first time, Elin spoke. No. It was quiet, almost fragile. Yet it didn't disappear. She stepped forward, her hands no longer trembling. This ends now. What followed wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no sudden collapse, just a slow, irreversible movement. Lena stayed. A lawyer was called, then another. The files were handed over. Carefully, deliberately. And for once, Johan had nothing to control. Weeks later, in a small apartment in Stockholm, Elin sat by the window again. The light looked different now. Not brighter, but freer. I thought strength meant enduring, she said softly. But it doesn't. Lena nodded. Strength, Elin continued, is knowing when something is wrong, and choosing not to stay silent. Life rarely breaks all at once. It changes quietly, through small compromises, unnoticed patterns, and things we convince ourselves to accept. Especially in relationships, control does not always arrive loudly. It often comes dressed as care, structure, or responsibility. For many, the hardest truth is not recognizing the problem, but admitting it and leaving. But leaving is not always about walking away from a person. Sometimes it is about walking back toward yourself. There is dignity in patience, but there must also be dignity in boundaries. There is love in giving, but there must be honesty in what we receive in return. Because a home should feel safe, not silent. And a life, no matter how carefully built, should never require you to disappear in order to keep it intact.